That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, so it's about that time of the year. I think it's about time for us to go through and look at our fantasy football playoff schedules. Now, of course, if you are currently a 2-7 team, if you are 3-6, it's not your time to think about the fantasy football playoffs. You need to be focusing in on getting wins right now, and this video is not going to really do anything for you. However, if you're 6-3, if you're 7-2, if you're 8-1, if you've been lucky enough to be 9-0, we need to be adjusting our lens for the production we need in our starting lineup to be in weeks 15, 16, and 17. And that's going to be the scope when I'm looking at right now. I think that in previous seasons, you needed to set up your playoffs to be in weeks 14, 15, 16, so you can avoid the last week where you have starters for those playoff teams being benched. This year's a little bit different. We have the extra game. So now your playoffs should be in weeks 15, 16, 17. We're going to be looking at running backs that can continue to grow their roles and their offenses. We're also going to be looking at running backs that have really nice end of season schedules. But of course, before we get into it, we have to give away some Fantasy Flock Network hats. Let's go through and let's pick out some random comments. And of course, every time you go down there, you leave a like on the video, you go down and leave a comment, you get entered in to win a free Fantasy Flock Network hat. Patrick and Dips are going to be the winner for this video. All you have to do is go down and email me ASAP when you win that Fantasy Flock Network hat with your address so I can get that hat shipped out to you. And also, go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. With Underdog Fantasy, you can get into some drafts with us this season on the live stream. Yes, we're going to be doing end of season drafts on those live streams. And at the same time, they have awesome player props that are available in damn near every single state. I've gotten crushed on the player props over the past 2 weeks. And when you use promo code FLOCK and you make at least a $10 deposit, they match you dollar for dollar on that first deposit up to $100. So please make sure you take advantage of that. And that supports this channel so much. And yeah, let's go through. Let's look at these running backs, starting off with James Robinson. Now, with James Robinson, this was a running back that we talked about potentially looking to sell high a couple weeks ago when he was coming off of 20-point performance, 20-point performance, 20-point, 20-point. I mean, he looked fantastic over that month duration. And the reason that I was going, okay, well, maybe it's to a point where if we can move off James Robinson, if we can get to a running back like Jonathan Taylor, if we can get to Austin Eckler, it'd make a lot of sense because everybody was riding so high. And of course, everybody loves Robinson for great reason, given the fact that this is someone that most people got off the waiver wire in 2020 and he won you your league. And here with Robinson, he looked like he was going to be a league winner as well with the Travis Etienne injury. We were saying it could have been an intriguing spot to sell high back when he was going into his bye week after week 6, not because we thought he was going to get injured. Of course, I mean, I would be just a straight up clown if I came out here and I told you that I was going to be able to predict a James Robinson injury. But the reasoning behind that is you were looking at the schedule that he had in the middle part of the season. You're going, okay, well, this schedule's not that great. I mean, he has the Bills, the Seahawks, I mean, the 49ers, the Rams. I mean, you don't really love those matchups. However, in the fantasy football playoffs, those teams that are gearing up for the end of the season right now where your production really matters, this is a fantastic opportunity to now buy James Robinson when his price is significantly lower than it was going into week 7. And not only are you buying him, you've already made it past those difficult matchups because he was injured. And instead, we're going to be able to just play him for those great matchups you have at the end of the season. I mean, we actually have him going up against the Houston Texans in week 15, the New York Jets in week 16, and the New England Patriots in week 17. If we're looking at that week 15 matchup, I really want to just set the tone with this video in saying that I know a lot of people, they're going to primarily be focusing in on your matchup for the championship game. I know a lot of people are going to say, well, Mason, doesn't week 17 matter the most? That's the championship. No. I mean, I think that it actually matters the most for you to have a great round 1 matchup, a great round 2 matchup, because we know if you're a playoff team, you're guaranteed to be in round 1. I don't necessarily want to be taking on a bad round 1 matchup just so we can have some great matchup later on where, I mean, we don't even know if we're going to be there. So let's primarily focus in on weeks 15, 16, and 17. In that order. And with the Houston Texans, right now, they have the 5th worst defense against the run this season. If we're going to be looking at average fantasy points allowed from opposing running backs. Now we're going to be looking at the New York Jets. The New York Jets have the worst defense that you can have. They're giving up 29.5 points per game to the opposing running back position. Now, if we're going to go over to the New England Patriots, yes, the Patriots, they're a middle-of-the-road defense when it comes against the running backs, but still, it doesn't matter. If you're getting that top 5 matchup against Houston, and you're also getting the best matchup you could ask for against the New York Jets as well in weeks 15 and 16, I think Robinson's a clear buy low candidate. Now, I will say there's one issue going through and trading for James Robinson for that playoff stretch, and this is why I'm not going all in on Robinson here, and I definitely want to have this asterisk, because if someone wanted to make this argument, I think it's a fair argument to make. We at least have to mention that this will be a team that's not going to be playing for anything by the time we get to that point in the season. I mean, they will actively be incentivized to lose games. Maybe, just maybe, Urban Meyer can pull out a couple wins over the next month or two to the point where it looks like he's not guaranteed to get fired after this season, which I know everybody and their mom watching this video right now wants Urban Meyer to get fired. Now, I don't think it's a guarantee at this point. So maybe Urban Meyer does everything that he can to win a couple of these last games just so his record at the end of Trevor Lawrence's rookie season looks just fine. But I do want to put the asterisk on it that the Jacksonville Jaguars are not one of those competitive teams that we know they're going to be going down and just using James Robinson as that workhorse to make sure that they're coming away with these wins at the end of the season. I mean, if Robinson did suffer an ankle sprain, in week 12, he would really have no incentive to go through and rush his way back to just a losing franchise. So it's an interesting spot. But just based on how dominant Robinson has been when he's been healthy, and as well as the fact that he has a great schedule for the fantasy football playoffs, if you're a contending team, I think it would make a lot of sense going through and trading for him. Now let's go over to another team that's not really playing for anything at this point. Another player that you could get really cheaply right now. Let's go over to David Montgomery, obviously making his return this past week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, a tough matchup. He only gets 2 targets out of the backfield, which of course you don't like to see. And that's honestly something that I'll say is going to limit David Montgomery's ceiling going forward, because we just have to look at the offensive environment that he's playing in and understand, well, with David Montgomery, he's playing alongside the rushing quarterback in Justin Fields. Historically, with those rushing quarterbacks, whether it's going to be Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Cam Newton, usually their checkdown rate isn't going to be nearly as high as what you would have with those traditional pocket passing options, someone like Phillip Rivers or Drew Brees. So that may limit what we get from David Montgomery in the receiving game. And also, he may be limited what we have with his red zone role. And we know those are the 2 things that matter at the running back position. We've done this research. I think a lot of people have caught on now that the things that matter at the running back position in the PPR format, usage in the red zone, usage in the receiving game. Raw touches don't matter nearly as much here. And I definitely want to put that out there with David Montgomery. There are reasons to be bearish on both aspects of those games for him, but that's going to be giving you David Montgomery at a massive discount. I mean, pretty much everybody at this point knows that David Montgomery is not going to be the running back that he was in 2020, which we've covered at length. But if we're going to go through, we're going to check out the matchups here going up against the Minnesota Vikings in week 15. That's going to be a top 10 matchup for opposing running backs going up against the Seattle Seahawks, who currently have the 4th worst defense against the run. I mean, those are the first 2 weeks. And also for that championship week, you get the New York Giants, who have about the 6th worst defense against the run. So David Montgomery doesn't have a single bad matchup. Now, I will say it's intriguing because with David Montgomery, you obviously want these games to be close between the Chicago Bears and whoever they're going to be going up against. I'd imagine that the spread on that Minnesota Vikings game and the New York Giants game, it's not going to be out of hand, where those games could at the very minimum be competitive, as we saw in a tough matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers a week ago. But with David Montgomery, I still think he's an intriguing trade target because of the end of season schedule. But I do want to be saying that there are some reasons to be a little bit hesitant and not go all in on. But now our next running back, someone that I think we can safely go all in on. He'll be playing on a competitive team at the end of the season. I mean, there's no reason to expect that his role is going to shrink. He's been getting 90% of the snaps every week that he has been healthy for his offense. Daryl Henderson. Now, with Daryl Henderson as a running back that, my God, can he play a full game healthy? Like at this point, Maybe you want to make the argument, well, Mason, I just don't think Daryl Henderson can stay healthy throughout the entire season. I am of the opinion that I think people are way too overconfident with their ability to predict injuries from a fantasy football standpoint. And I think that a lot of injury-centered analysis is honestly just garbage, and we're wasting our time. And instead, we should be chasing opportunity and looking at how these game flows and what Las Vegas is telling us by overall situations. But nonetheless, with Daryl Henderson here, if we're talking about those last 3 matchups, a couple familiar teams that you're going to note. I mean, just like we were talking about with Montgomery, Daryl Henderson here going up against the Seattle Seahawks. Right now, Seattle averaging over 20 points a game to the opposing backfield of the teams they're playing against. Minnesota, also a top 10 defense. We want to be attacking at the run. I mean, they're actually averaging 18.5 points for those opposing running backs. And then the Baltimore Ravens. Now, Baltimore, a little bit different here. I mean, with the Baltimore Ravens, they're actually, right next to Minnesota. I was operating under the assumption that Baltimore was going to be a better defense overall, but they're instead currently at 18.4 points allowed per game to opposing running backs. So, I mean, this is kind of what we're chasing, because with these good matchups, we don't necessarily need Daryl Henderson to only be going up against the Detroit Lions, the New York Jets, and the Los Angeles Chargers to find his great running back matchups. But with these playoff RBs, you really just want to make sure, okay, are they not going up against the Bills? They're not going up against the Cardinals. They're not going up against the Steelers. They're not going up against the Saints. If you can just go through and avoid all those other matchups, and every single week we have no problem going through and identifying that starting player, I think that's fantastic. I think if you're looking at the opportunity that Henderson has in this offense, how efficient this offense is overall, he's a great running back to be buying anyway, and not to mention this end of season playoff schedule is completely fine. Now, you know, if you've been watching this channel for a while, who our next running back is going to be. This is someone that you know we had to include him on the video. Let's go over to Javonte Williams. And yes, with Javonte Williams, over the next 2 to 3 weeks, this will not be a running back that you can go through, confidently start, as we've said all season now. I mean, with Javonte Williams, you weren't expecting the breakout until the second half of the year based on what we've historically seen with these rookie running backs that go to a backfield that has a solid veteran player alongside them. With Javonte, I think everybody and their mom can understand that Javonte is the more talented running back in Denver, the running back with more juice. He got drafted with the 3rd pick overall in the 2nd round, and the Denver Broncos traded up to make that investment into him. And I just want to put some context in how high of a draft pick that is for the running back position, and historically what that means for these players that are going to be looking at that level of team investment. That's in the same exact range as what you had with someone like Nick Chubb back in 2018. That's higher than what we had with Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift back in 2020. And to see that he gets his team so excited that they think he fits his scheme well enough that they're going up and they're going out of their way to trade up for Javonte Williams. That's very telling on what we could see. And if we're drawing parallels, who's another team that went through and traded up to take a running back at the very top of the 2nd round that profiled to be a 3-down guy coming into that NFL draft back in 2020? It's Jonathan Taylor. Now, with Javonte Williams, I am going to be confidently saying that if you're looking at him as a prospect, I mean, this was not someone coming out of UNC that looked anything like Jonathan Taylor, if we're going to be completely honest. I mean, Taylor looked more like Saquon Barkley than he did with Javonte Williams. But nonetheless, he did profile to be a 3-down running back. And I will say that if you're going to go through, let's look historically. We kind of drawn this comparison a couple times before, but I think the perfect example is going back to that 2019 draft class and seeing another running back that was selected in the 2nd round that was running alongside Jordan Howard to start his rookie season. And then he eventually worked his own role up from Jordan Howard. Like, let's look at the first 8 weeks. Right now, Javonte Williams has been about the running back 30 on a points per game basis through the first 8 weeks. And Myles Sanders, through his first 8 weeks, was the running back 30 his rookie season. Now, to go through and look at the second half of the season to try to figure out what happened here, I mean, if we're going to go through and just look at the fantasy football playoffs, let's look at the last month and that production that you had from Myles Sanders in this Philadelphia Eagles offense. I mean, the same thing here happened with Jonathan Taylor. You see these running backs start slow. Myles Sanders, a top 3 running back over the past month, his rookie season. Now, I'm not saying that Javonte Williams is guaranteed to be that top 3 player. I'm not saying he's going to have that same exact breakout as Myles Sanders, but I'm saying it's not very uncommon at all. If anything, you would argue that it's very common for a rookie running back to have a smaller role but flash talent at the beginning part of his season. And then by the time we get to the fantasy football playoffs where the points really matter, that's when he jumps up and that's when he's taking the majority of the opportunities in that offense. And with Javonte Williams, I mean, right now, the Denver Broncos have the 4th best schedule for the fantasy football playoffs. They're going to be going up against the Cincinnati Bengals in week 15. If you're checking out this Cincinnati Bengals matchup, I mean, they right now are giving up about 19 points a game to the running back position. That's a great matchup that I think we can be attacking. The Las Vegas Raiders right there as well. They're giving up 18.8 points per game to the running back position. Top 10 matchups right there. And also the Los Angeles Chargers. Obviously, this Chargers defense, I mean, has just been a run funnel so far this season where they're allowing every running back just to take it right up the middle. And it's kind of funny how they're able to effectively shut down the pass, but they can't do anything against the run. So yeah, Javonte has 3 great matchups during his fantasy football playoff stretch. And to go along with it, he has the profile where we've seen historically these running backs that have this similar level of team investment that flash as young rookies at the beginning part of their season. They're going to continue to expand their role. So I'm going to continue to bet on Javonte Williams, even though probably Melvin Gordon's going to come out and score more points this week. Now let's go over to our next running back here, and we'll breeze through a couple of these players. I want to just, we're not going to talk in depth about these two guys, but I at least want to bring them up because they do have great matchups. Antonio Gibson and Myles Gaskin each have great matchups for the fantasy football playoffs. They're right now the 5th and 6th best teams if you're just going to be looking at an aggregate for those playoff schedules. And with Gibson, it's intriguing because I think that this is a running back that by the time we get there, maybe he continues to expand his role. Maybe Jarrett Patterson doesn't get any work this next week. And if Gibson is just fully healthy coming out of the shin injury, and then all of a sudden we get to the great playoff schedule of Philadelphia, Dallas, and Philadelphia over that 3-week stretch, you can be excited about playing Antonio Gibson. And in reality, it's kind of hard to see. That's why I'm not going to be including Antonio Gibson as a priority out on this list. I do want to mention him as someone that has a great matchup, as well as Myles Gaskin is also another running back that has a great matchup. The issue is, however, with Myles Gaskin, I mean, we have a couple issues. With Gaskin, he's not playing on that competitive team. That's something that we discussed with Daryl Henderson, that you really want those running backs to be playing on that real NFL playoff team. That way, by the time we get to the second part of the season, they're, heavily incentivized to go out there and play to the best of their ability. If they have that ankle injury in week 15 or in week 12, they're not just shutting it down for the season. Rather, they're going to go through and they're going to push through that injury. Now, with a player like Myles Gaskin, that really doesn't exist for the Miami Dolphins. Maybe you're saying that Gaskin's just going to be playing for that contract because obviously this is a player who really has not made that much money in the NFL. He doesn't have guaranteed money on his deal. And also an issue with Myles Gaskin is, he has had a pretty impressive past 3-week stretch, which is something that we kind of expected to happen just because Malcolm Brown got hurt. I have no idea why nobody is talking about this. We hated Myles Gaskin coming into the season because we knew Malcolm Brown was going to be able to get about 40% of the touches in this backfield. And we're saying, okay, well, we're not taking a committee running back in Myles Gaskin in the 5th round of fantasy drafts. And when he's playing on one of the worst offenses in the NFL, now, as soon as Malcolm Brown goes down, Myles Gaskin's doubling his carries on a per-game basis. That's not a coincidence. It sounds like Malcolm Brown will be able to be back for that stretch of games. So I think Myles Gaskin, while he does have a great schedule, I don't want to be getting too excited. Also, if you are a playoff team, I don't necessarily think that all of a sudden you just have to be going out and trading for someone like Myles Gaskin, because if you're a playoff team, wouldn't you have 2 better running backs than Gaskin to plug in that starting lineup? Let's go over to our next running back. Let's look at the check boxes that we have. Okay, playoff team, going to be competitive at the end of the year, and great fantasy football playoff schedule. That's Leonard Fournette right here, with Leonard Fournette going up against the New Orleans Saints in week 15. So pretty tough matchup. The Saints right now are only allowing about 12.5 fantasy points per game to the running back position. So maybe you won't be wanting to play Leonard Fournette in week 15 himself. So maybe if you're the 9-0 roster, maybe if you were just almost at this point guaranteed to have that first round playoff bye, then Leonard Fournette's going to be the player that you're going to go out there and try to get. Now, the Carolina Panthers defense has definitely flashed some talent before. They're right now on a per game basis, near the better end of the teams that maybe you're not excited to play Leonard Fournette in week 16 either. Week 17, though, he's going up against the New York Jets. Right now the Jets are giving up 29.6 fantasy points per game to the running back position. So I think for that reason, you have to be pretty excited about Fournette. Maybe we have to put the caveat on there. Get Leonard Fournette if you were that 9-0 roster, that 8-1 team that really doesn't need to worry about playing him in week 15. And then we can just more so look at that great matchup we'll have for the fantasy football championship game. Going over to our last running back, let's talk about Chris Carson. Carson, y'all know I've never been a massive fan of Chris Carson here. And he has a very similar situation of what you're looking at with Leonard Fournette, where in week 15 going against the Rams, I mean, the Rams have allowed about 16 points per game to the opposing running backs. Not fantastic and not horrible. Then he has the Chicago Bears in week 16. But I mean, with Chris Carson, very similar to Leonard Fournette, not excited about the first 2 weeks, but for that fantasy football playoff championship, you'd be very excited about him going up against the Detroit Lions. And the thing with Chris Carson is he's going to be dirt free right now coming out of this injury. We really don't know what to expect with Carson. I think the main playoff targets that we should have are going to be players like James Robinson, Daryl Henderson, and Javonte Williams. Those are the 3 guys that I think we can get at a discount right now that can continue to increase their value from here. And they have the great matchups in the fantasy football playoff stretch that we can be taking advantage of. So those would be the 3 players that I am definitely going to be trying to prioritize on this list to go out there and get for the second part of the season. But please keep in mind that if you are that team that's 3-6, if you're that team that's 2-7, I hate to say it, this video is not for you. This video is really not for you at all. You should be prioritizing to get production in your lineup right now, because the last thing you can ever think about is the fantasy football playoffs. Because if you're 2-7 and you don't start winning, if you don't win like the next 4 out of 5 games, you're not making it to the fantasy football playoffs. So don't be trading for someone like Javonte Williams, who may not be great over the next 3 weeks. However, you're excited about the end of the season, because the end of the season right now doesn't matter for you. This is a video made for the team that's 5-4, 6-3, 7-2, 8-1, 9-0. But yeah, thank you so much, of course, for being a part of the flock and supporting the channel. I really hope y'all are able to get something from this video. Make sure you go down there, drop that like, leave a comment to get entered in to win a Fantasy Flock Network hat. Go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. When you sign up for Underdog Fantasy, check out a ton of player props. Go get in a draft with us. And at the same time, they match you dollar for dollar on your first deposit. Make sure you use promo code FLOCK. Nothing supports this channel more. Yeah, thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.